Thank you for being here. I'm Josh Terringel. I'm the editor of Business Week and the head of Bloomberg Television. It's my honor to have this quite impressive panel of people to talk about U.S. cities. We'll do brief introductions, and then we're just going to ping pong around. We'll try and leave time at the end for questions from the audience. It would seem unfair not to. To my far left is Walter Robb, the co-CEO of Whole Foods and the chair of the Whole Cities Foundation as well.
That's right, yeah.
I'm trying to go from memory. It's going to be tough. Kathy Wild, who is head of the Foundation for
Partnership
for New York City, which I will say, as a resident of New York, is hugely responsible for facilitating the public-private partnerships that really make the city more livable. It's a hugely important institution. To my right is Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom and former mayor of San Francisco. CEO Tony Hsieh of Zappos, who is also involved in a tremendously ambitious undertaking in downtown Las Vegas. We are certainly going to talk about that. And lastly, another co-CEO, this of Gensler, the design and architecture firm, Andy Cohn. You have 46 offices worldwide?
Right. Around the world.
Around the world. And you also are on the, what is the body at UCLA, the sustainability body?
Sustainability, yes.
We'll talk about sustainability as well. So as the only non-CEO, Lieutenant Governor, and
well, hold on, I got 15 small businesses, about 1,000 employees.
As the only person with a military-like title, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I want to start with you, and I hate to rain on the parade of, I believe our title is U.S. Cities Leading the Way. But to what degree is all of the kind of innovation we're seeing in policy and planning a direct result of the lack of federal funding?
Meaning forcing innovative thinking, forcing us to think outside the box. I think that's part of it, but I think there's an entrepreneurial spirit that's always been alive and well, even in the good times at the local level. And I think, you know, there's an old saw, and you all have heard it, but states are laboratories of democracy, cities laboratories of innovation. And the real breakthroughs are really happening at the local level. And it's fortuitous, isn't it? Because it follows the broader trends that we're all experiencing. So we're moving from something old to something new. The industrial economy is running out of steam. It's running out of gas. It's an atrophy. It's stalled. And now it's about bottom-up, not top-down thinking. The pyramid has been inverted, and it's cities that are enlivened by proximity, enlivened by a lack of ideology. It's pragmatism. That's the governing principle. And it's a two-way conversation that we're having at the local level, which, of course, creates a kind of energy that I think expands the horizon of capacity and possibility. And that is lost at the state level, and certainly is lost with all the quarreling that's being done at the federal level.
I think that's a great table-setting defense of cities as sort of innovation labs. At the same time, you've run a budget. I mean, is there just some sense that there is no more white knight? There's no one coming to save you, and so you have to figure out ways?
Yeah, I mean, leadership in the past was to find people in elected office of giving things away. Now, leadership in the new world we're living in is taking things away. It's a little more difficult. And so there's a couple ways of doing it. You can cut budgets, or you can tax your way to prosperity. Neither necessarily work. You've got to grow your way. And I think the most progressive cities, and progressive in a non-ideological sense, are ones that understand you've got to create conditions, platform thinking, conditions where success becomes irresistible, where you create conditions where people can entrepreneurially take risk and experience the reward of that risk, and create the conditions where you can bring people together with a quality of life that's superior to your competitors. So, you know, from my perspective as former mayor of San Francisco, it was all about climate control, not the old adage of leadership in the past, which was command and control. It's not hierarchical thinking. I'm not selling down a vision as mayor. It's, again, this notion of the platform, different metaphors. Organic metaphors. I know I'm from San Francisco, and that seems rote, doesn't it? Organic metaphors, but it's really true. It's this notion of cultivation, of coordination and collaboration, as opposed to machine thinking, which was you vote, I decide, and I dispense more things to you, is given away to something completely different, active citizenship, not inert citizenship. So it's a different paradigm, and it's one I think the private sector understands intimately, and increasingly government at the state and federal level is going to be compelled by the nature of these trends to understand in the future.
So, Kathy, I thought we'd ask you, we hear public-private partnership, and it can mean anything to anybody at any time. How do you go about defining what it is, and how scalable are these partnerships? If you could give us some examples of the small and the large.
Well, under Mayor Bloomberg for the last 12 years, for example, we really created highly scaled public-private partnerships. And built New York City into the second largest city economy in the world, $616 billion a year in economic output, second only to Tokyo. Diversified the economy, so the fastest growing sectors are the tech and creative and tourism sectors. And that was really all accomplished through public-private partnerships. Bloomberg understood how to leverage the city's assets, both its major corporations, its major institutions, medical, cultural, universities. And that's something that these had been kind of ivory tower places historically, doing their own thing, looking inward. Something that California and their public universities have been good at for a long time, very new in New York. And that really has moved those relationships to scale, but it's really because we had an ability to tap the resources and the shared interests of the private sector and the public sector. Great world cities. The partnership that I work for, the Partnership for New York City, was founded by David Rockefeller. He thought the business community had been asleep at the switch in the 70s when urban America was going down the tubes. And he organized the partnership to be business working in the interests of the city. And so that was very much our mission. He understood that great world cities are the essential platform for the international global economy, for international business in a global economy. And therefore, business really had a stake in making that happen. And Bloomberg understood that constitutionally and was able to push that forward. The one area that I would raise, and I'm sure the Lieutenant Governor doesn't disagree with me, the problem with the federal government is we're now competing against cities around the world that have the full force of their national government behind them, whether it's immigration policy or it's public infrastructure investment or it's support for job creation activities. We're not in that position now. And it's become a real debilitating factor in terms of competition for U.S. cities to be able to achieve the kind of growth we need to deal with the urban challenge.
Can you give us an example of something, an opportunity that may have been missed as a result of that unfair balance?
Well, there are many. Immigration reform is an obvious one. New York City's population growth now is 8.4 million, the largest in our history, but we basically only are there. Our growth comes from international foreign immigration, and then we populate the country as a pass-through. We don't grow from domestic immigration. And so immigration policy for the last 12 years is really cutting off our ability to attract the best and brightest to our universities, to our research organizations, to our entrepreneurial sector. It's really a mess. And that is, I would think, probably the single biggest challenge that we face with the federal government, aside from the various fiscal ones, of the loss of R&D funding from the federal government. That's a couple $2 billion a year that fuels our country's biotech and these other systems, the tech sectors that are growing here. We've lost 20% of that funding in the last couple of years, and more to come. So those are the kind of things that are irreplaceable. And of course, mass transit is the other area. We're trying to open up new areas of the city and communities to support growth. And mass transit funding has to be a shared responsibility with Washington.
Well, so interestingly, today the Obama administration delivered a $304 billion transportation reauthorization bill to Congress. And in the bill is a tacit admission, and actually an explicit admission, that there is just no way that it's going to be able to cover everything for infrastructure and transportation. So to all of you, how scalable are public-private partnerships to that level, to kind of tackle those just essential, to the functioning society level? I mean, we've seen, and we can talk about numerous use cases where they can solve problems, but can they solve problems at that scale? Anyone?
Thinking you down there.
Yeah, that's yours.
Yeah, let's go to the designer and the architect, yes.
Well, I think as an example, transit-oriented design as being an example of a macro-scale program that's rolling across the U.S. right now. I was in Denver yesterday, and to see what's going on at Union Station, to see the vibrant mixed-use developments going around in that area, to see how it's revitalizing Denver as an example, is ways which using transit-oriented development as part of PPP, the Union Station project was all a PPP program, is one that I think is the future around another key area, which is mixed use, and creating vibrant, walkable, bicycle, millennial downtowns that are about creating vibrancy and revitalizing the city. And Denver, as an example, would be a great one with public-private partnership really work well.
But you're seeing the innovation. I mean, the answer is scale. I mean, no, not at the scale, of sort of a command and control economy. There's 5-year plans that we're seeing in these Asian countries. But you're seeing local infrastructure banks being put together in Chicago, in the state of California, state-run infrastructure banks to build these public-private partnerships and to obviate the reality or the needs of the federal largesse. You're seeing it with public housing and public-private partnerships since Hope 6 is now defunct, and we're seeing some creative ways of doing what the federal government was doing in the past. So no one's rolling over. Even on immigration. I mean, New York shares with San Francisco the very controversial policy of sanctuary city, which means de facto cities are putting together their own immigration plans and policies because of the inability for the federal government to reconcile its policies. I assure you, you watch. It's not just places like Arizona and others. States like California will take the lead if the federal government doesn't on immigration reform. States are sort of fed up. So there's this notion of, again, taking responsibility in the absence of that federal largesse and leadership. So I think people can work around it. I don't necessarily think it's good, but it's necessary under the circumstances.
So one of the most recent census things that we just raised, but I think we should at least codify and discuss a bit more, is that there are America's largest metro areas are growing and very, very healthy, but they're being fueled by 2 distinct migration patterns. On the one hand, they're the choices of resident Americans. And those resident Americans overwhelmingly are moving to places like San Francisco, Seattle, Houston, Dallas. Immigrant to the country.
Austin, by the way.
Austin, yes. Austin's also doing very well. Immigrants are coming in and they're going to the traditional ports of call. Boston, New York, Miami. What does that data mean to us? I mean, how does it affect cities? I mean, we talk about cities in a monolithic way, which of course we shouldn't. But what are the unique challenges? You touched on one, that New York has a huge immigrant body coming in and the population drains out. It's harder to replenish. How else does that sort of manifest itself as you manage a city?
I feel like I've taken up too much of your time.
No.
You managed a city, so have at it.
Yeah, I mean, you have managed a city, so.
It's not his city's problem.
Yeah, no, quite the contrary. But look, I mean, let's establish let's step back a second. I mean, so some fundamental facts, which you, I'm sure, are already familiar with, but just to underscore them. I mean, 90% of the GDP in the United States of America is emanating from metros. And we could broadly, it would be very difficult to get 3 people to describe exactly what a city is. And Brookings and others will extenuate city beyond its borders to the larger metro and the suburban areas around it. 85% of all the jobs in the United States of America are emanating out of these metro areas. So when I think of this country, I don't think of red states, blue states. Frankly, I look at these metro areas as the engine for economic growth and prosperity. One of the reasons I went on a bipartisan trip, here's some politics, with 14 Republicans and myself, that's bipartisan in California, to Texas, was not to go see a red state, but to hang out with Walter's folks in blue cities, in blue metros that are doing some remarkable, innovative economic development work, again, from bottom up, and embracing open immigration policies, not tolerating their diversity, but truly celebrating the diversity and recognizing diversity as the pulse of creativity. And as a framework, I think what makes these metro areas that are the most successful economically is embracing those core principles and working aggressively to the extent they can to make themselves truly international points of destination. And that becomes, again, at the end of the day, I think, an economic competitive edge. And you hear that from Republican mayors, not just Democratic mayors. It's remarkable how the ideology at the local level is given away to hard-headed pragmatism, and how, as you creep up, sadly, to the state and federal level, it becomes more and more tribal in the capacity to be independent, including Michael Bloomberg, who I'm sure was prepared to spend more than $1 billion, probably multiple $1 billion to become president of the United States, realized even his incapacity with all the money in the world to run independently in a country that is so bifurcated in these sort of Democratic frames and Republican frames, which is truly unfortunate.
So, Walter, just apropos of this, you've at Whole Foods have made cities sort of core to who you are? Obviously, there's an economic incentive, but there's more to it. Can you tell us a little bit about why cities are so important to you and what the most recent activity is as far as Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I totally agree with Gavin that they're the centers of economic growth. And if you look at worldwide and you look at where the future of the economic growth is going to be in 10 or 12 major cities around the world, that's where it's going to be. But for us in particular, you know, we're only 35 years old as a company, but in the last 3 years, we have made investments in several inner cities of America, Detroit, Chicago, and coming up in Newark, and also forgetting one. So
Brooklyn.
This is my
Brooklyn.
my Rick Perry moment. What is it?
Brooklyn.
No, Brooklyn. Not Brooklyn. But what I want to talk about is I think what's been remarkable is, you know, one of the things is the role of mayors. And you talk about leadership of taking away. It's also leadership of reaching out. And, you know, and I've gotten calls from Cory Booker and Rahm Emanuel calling me directly saying, I'd like you to come to our city and invest. And that was meaningful. And I said, I want to come down and sit down. Do you mean what you're saying? Are you really prepared to do this? Do you really want to do this? And the answer in those conversations was yes. And so, for example, in Chicago, they created the institutional sort of framework for us to be able, the economic development funds with the developer to clear some of the permitting out, and then we could bring our capital, our expertise, and so forth in to develop a store. So I think this idea of the public-private partnerships, devoid of ideology, focused on pragmatism. We brought in the city of Detroit, we brought a $12 million investment, created 130 jobs, 45 new suppliers. So the direct investment, the jobs, this is what really matters to these communities and creates the growth. And so I think the power of these partnerships is incredible. And I've seen the mayors have a lot to do with creating that framework of possibility. And I think also it's a new chapter of dialogue between the company and the community. On our experience in Detroit, we found that they'd seen it all before. The white knight thing, companies have come in and not kept their promises, and they were very skeptical about a company, particularly one our size, of whether we would do what we said we would do. And so we started out with a very antagonistic sort of vibe on the community. We stayed with it and got in dialogue, and I remember being in some shouting matches with activists who want us to sign a community benefits agreement. I said, we're not going to do that, but what we're going to do is talk about what you want. And at the end, I think the learning from that and from our experience in New Orleans, which by the way is the fourth city, this idea of rethinking on both sides, a community and a company, is what creates a whole new range of possibilities. So if community activists are willing to let go of what they think a company or a corporation is, and companies are willing to rethink their responsibilities to participate in that community, then magical things are possible. And I tell you, I've had this direct personal experience in these two cities over the last couple of years. It's a very powerful thing to go back, and most companies just take their citizenship in a city for granted, so to speak. And to Rockefeller's point, is like, wake up and see this is where you are based, this is where you're earning your way forward, and rethink this idea of partnership with the community. It's very, very powerful. And actually, I'll just finish up here. In New Orleans, Goldman actually put up the money. Goldman Sachs, with their urban investment group, actually put up the loan for the developer to buy the property, and they held that loan on their balance sheet, which I thought was very impressive, instead of just flipping it. And we actually have nonprofits, for-profits. We have 6 of us in the building. Literally, the partnership is in the physical building together. So we're sharing things back and forth. So Liberty's Kitchen is a nonprofit youth development organization. They make food. We are buying some of their food, creating jobs. It's actually happening within the building. And so I think this sort of model of partnership and collaboration and dialogue is very powerful for the cities going forward. And to your issue of scale, I just think maybe the thing about scale is you think about scale differently. You get to scale through the onesies and twosies, as opposed to thinking you got to go and scale up like that. Let's come from the ground up, like what Tony's doing in Las Vegas, and build it that way and see what aggregates and see what spreads, and build our solutions in that way.
So that's a good segue. Tony, why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing there? And to stipulate, it's mostly personal funds you put in, correct?
Yeah, I guess just to give some background, Zappos has been around for about 15 years now. We're at about 1,500 employees doing several $1 billion a year in gross merchandise sales. And a couple years ago, as we were growing, we were spread amongst different buildings, and we're looking for a place to build a permanent campus and call home, and looking for a place that had enough land to expand upon as well. And we found out that the city of Las Vegas was actually building a new city hall and moving out. So we ended up moving into the former city hall. Initially, our thought process was, let's design our dream campus, and visited campuses like Apple and Nike and Google that had these amazing, beautiful campuses. But over time, started to think, what if we actually turned the entire concept inside out? Because those other corporate campuses were great, but they were actually really insular and didn't really integrate or contribute to the community around them. And what if we took an approach that was more like NYU, where the campus kind of blends in with the city, where actually we're encouraging our employees to go out into the community and encouraging people from the community to go onto our campus. And so we moved into the former city hall about 6 months ago. And it just so happens that by magical coincidence, this was just a few blocks away from this area of downtown Vegas that most tourists, or even myself until a few years ago, don't know about. Most people, when they think Vegas, they think the big casinos on the Strip, which technically aren't even in the city of Las Vegas, or if they know anything about downtown, it's the old casinos, the overhead light show. But there's this area called Fremont East, where if you go into any of the bars or coffee shops or restaurants, there's no gaming, and you'd have no idea you were in Vegas. In fact, it would be almost the complete opposite of the typical Vegas that people know. So Zappos was actually sold to Amazon a little over 4 years ago. And so myself and Fred, who joined Zappos the same time I did about 15 years ago, we started a separate company called Downtown Project. And we just funded it ourselves with $350 million. And roughly the way the budget's divided up is $50 million is being set aside for small businesses to help build a sense of neighborhood and community, make downtown a walkable neighborhood. $50 million into tech startup companies, $50 million into arts, music, education, healthcare, and then the rest is into real estate. And so there's a few different goals. One is to help make it a walkable neighborhood. One is to help make downtown Vegas the most community-focused large city in the world, and probably the place people would least expect it. And then another is to make it the co-working capital of the world, not just in tech, but in fashion and culinary, and really you can imagine building co-working spaces around anything that you can build community around. But what makes us different from most real estate or developers that kind of have these short-term or medium-term ROI or cash flow goals is we're really, rather than focus on short-term ROI, we're really focused on what we internally refer to as long-term ROC, return on community, return on collisions. And so we actually have, it sounds a little silly, but we actually have metrics that we manage and track to really think about how do you make people in the community and the businesses and entrepreneurs and just in the residents, how do you actually make them luckier in the community, and how do you actually drive productivity and innovation increases? And there's a great book called Triumph of the City that's written by a Harvard economics professor that studied cities from all different time periods like Rome, New York, Detroit, and looked at why some thrived and some didn't. And a lot of the findings are actually kind of counterintuitive. And one of the interesting findings that he quotes is that every time the size of a city doubles, innovation or productivity per resident increases by 15%. But when companies get bigger, the opposite happens. Innovation and productivity per employee goes down. So from the Zappos perspective and from the perspective of these different businesses that we're investing in, we want to avoid that fate and really have that integration of ideas and people from different industries. And so we actually have, the metric we track is something we refer to as collisions or collisionable hours. And so most innovation, the research has shown, comes from something outside your industry being applied to your own. And so what we're trying to do is get together people of different backgrounds and industries and that have a bias to talk to each other, to be friendly, to share ideas, and statistically, the magic will just kind of happen on its own. And so specifically, the metric we're targeting is 100,000 collisionable hours per acre per year, which works out to 2.3 collisionable hours per square foot per year. And so it just gives a whole another lens through which to look through real estate. And so if we're investing in a 3,000 square foot restaurant, for example, you can do the math on how many customers and how long they're going to eat there, and then seeing whether the space actually yields those collisionable hours. And so we do that through all the different small business investments that we make.
So it is an absolutely amazing experiment. How much outreach did you do in advance to city government, and how much did you find out what people actually want out of their cities before going in?
So we actually, the city's been great, but we haven't really, we've really taken the entrepreneur approach. And so they're supportive when we need to do things like building things out of shipping containers, and then we need their support in that. But mostly we've tried to do things because we haven't asked the city or government for money, because we want to do things that using principles that could be replicated to other communities and cities. And so we have something internally we refer to as the 3 C's. Collisions, meaning that when you're in a public or semi-public place, the ability for you to serendipitously run into someone. Co-learning and connectedness, meaning the number and depth of relationships in the community. And so those are combined with diversity and density. And so you take those 5 things, and we're actually kind of agnostic about what the different things are. We're very anti-top-down kind of master programming, and really driven by entrepreneurs. And so it's really an entrepreneur, if they have an idea, we'll evaluate those things through those 5 things I just mentioned, and then if it passes those 5 things, then it's something that we'll invest in it. And so it's less about trying to it's less of a formal partnership with the city, and then it's less about us swooping in and saying, oh, this is what we think the community needs. It's people from the community, many times first-time entrepreneurs, that tell us their ideas, and then and we fund them. So just quick example, a couple years ago I met someone named Natalie who was working at the local coffee shop. Serendipitously ran into her, struck up a conversation, and turns out she had worked for 10 years as a chef in one of the casinos, and had just quit her job, was sick of working in a casino, and was actually packed up her bags to leave town already, and was about to leave town. Turns out that her lifelong dream was to open up her own breakfast and lunch place, so that actually ended up being one of the first small businesses that we funded. We put up all the capital, and then also helped with legal, accounting, setting up Wi-Fi, POS systems, and so on. She's been doing it for 1 year and 4 months, and the reason why I know it's 1 year and 4 months is because a month ago, at 1 year and 3 months, she actually paid back her entire original investment, is doing triple her initial projections, and her place is this new daytime hub for the community, where if you live there and you go eat there for an hour, chances are you'll run into 5 or 10 people you know, providing more collisions, more of a sense of community. And now she's ready to open up her next restaurant, and is also in the position to mentor kind of the next generation of first-time restaurant owners. So it becomes the community really helping itself.
That's amazing. So Andy, as a designer, someone you're familiar with urban redevelopment and all these plans, when you hear Tony talk about something that's sort of only sort of infrastructure, and then the people are supposed to go and fill it, how do you feel about that? How do you think about it?
Well, first of all, Tony's an unbelievable leader who's putting great people places together. I'm aware of all the great work he's doing, and it's all about, I think, creating vibrant environments and people spaces where people come together and they feel like they're in their own community. You know, it's all about creating sustainable places where people feel, especially the younger people, millennials, can come to and live, work, and play in places that are safe, vibrant, where, you know, creative work environments like Tony's creating. That's one of the things that my firm does. We do Workplace of the Future, where it's all about collaboration and bringing different people together, because now people through technology no longer have to go to the office. Now you can work anywhere, but the reason why people are still going and gathering in an office or living in that part of the city is because they want to collaborate. They want to be around other people. This is a Starbucks phenomenon, where people want to collaborate, be around other people, and integrate together.
You know, I was just going to say the one thing that Tony didn't say specifically. We read about his experiment, and we actually put forward in our plan for what we think is the next public-private partnership in New York, a plan to replicate it in some of our economically distressed communities where there's an opportunity for development and bringing tech community in there, a similar kind of model, and seed-funded and driven by private sector investment. But to do that in communities, we see that as really a response to the political reality that while New York City has done very well over the last decade and the tech community is flourishing, they're also pricing a large number of longtime New Yorkers out of the market. And we've got to bring technology and exposure to that to the technology community, to those communities. It can't just be something they learn in school. It's got to be really an exposure to hubs of innovation activity that are part and parcel of their communities. And so we're trying to figure out how to apply what you're doing in the New York setting to really deal with the political and economic realities that have divided our city.
I'll give you another example really quickly. Is we just completed an incubator space called 1871 in Chicago that Ron Emanuel was behind. And it's phenomenal. It's a technology incubator. Took a whole floor in the merchandise mart, and it's bringing 30 to 50 companies together that are incubating, similar to what you're discussing, Tony. And it's become now this hub, this innovation hub, and these hubs are being replicated around the US. Very similar to the discussion you were talking about.
And just for what it's worth, I never moved into the state building as lieutenant governor. I'm in an incubator. I have a desk with about 40 startups every 6 months, new startups coming in, and all this common space in order to get energized and enlivened. And I'll tell you, one of the missing ingredients is where the politicians are residing. Again, with an old mindset framed so often by the filter of special interest, again, selling down their vision, as opposed to realizing that the vision that we're all trying to attain must be realized at the local level, and precisely the way that all of you are trying to advance. So it's something I've encouraged. I haven't gotten anyone to take me up on it, but other elected officials to find their way out into the community in a much different environment than 8 floors up with a lot of lobbyists and a lot of special interest, permeating our minds with their points of view.
So one consequence of success that was sort of been hovering at the edges of this conversation is the word gentrification, which is when you do achieve sort of economic stability and people come in and a city gets revitalized. That can be a lovely problem for an economist to have and a disastrous problem for a politician to have. And for someone who heads a public company, I was wondering specifically around Detroit, where Whole Foods is associated with prosperity. Detroit was a city that prior to your arrival had no single chain grocery store. If you don't know this, you could go several miles in Detroit without the ability to buy a single fresh vegetable. How did you deal with those issues? Because they are so charged and so obvious, you don't need to go digging for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. There are 6,500 underserved areas in the United States. Detroit obviously is a very visible one, but you can go on the USDA website and you can look at these areas that are underserved as they define it, with no grocery store within 2 miles. But I think it goes back to this idea we're talking about, community. I think this is an incredibly rich word that people need to rethink what it really means. And it does mean a lot what Tony's talking about in terms of from the ground up, or from built collaboratively with the visions of people that are in the community. This idea that as a company you're going to go in and just say, I'm here with the answer. No, that's not it. It's you're going there to participate in what's already happening and to be part of that and try to contribute with a particular skill set. That sort of way of thinking, it honors what a community is. And I think in our journey there, we spent a year before we decided to go, and we spent 2 years before we opened to kind of really honor that, because there was so much mistrust that needed to be worked through. But one of the questions that does come up, particularly around us, was the gentrification one, which is that, okay, if you come in, it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if you don't, then things don't change, right? And there was no store there, and they were begging and looking for investment and for companies to come and for jobs. On the other hand, the concerns are if you come, then does it start to change the place where you're coming into? And I think there's no good answer to that other than to continuing the dialogue and the discussion. First of all, if you come in a responsible manner, an inclusionary manner, in a respectful manner, you're starting out in a better place than you would otherwise. And then I think just to be able to continue, we started talking with a number of groups in the community, and one of the metrics we were looking at is the housing units and how many folks are being, were they being pushed out of their housing units, or how is the housing stock beginning to change? And the question was, what could we do to contribute or participate? And I think that, for us in Detroit, particularly honoring the diversity of that community, I told our team, our success in Detroit, well, it's a profitable store, it's a for-profit venture, but will be measured by our ability to serve the wide diversity of the community and continue to serve the diversity of the community. And so one proxy for us is food stamps. We're 7 times our company average in Detroit, suggesting to me, at least so far, that we've been able to continue to serve. And we've had to tweak our model in order to be able to do that. But it's an intensely, gentrification leads to racism, leads to any number of very highly charged topics. And these are topics that need to be, they could deserve a session of their own in terms of how you think about this. I know in Detroit, for example, there are folks that are doing trainings on both of these topics to raise people's awareness about these topics. And so I think it starts with going in the right way. I think it stays with a consciousness about how your effort is affecting the community and what changes it's creating, and then being a part of an active dialogue about that.
I would add really quickly that, like Walter's saying, cities are made up of communities. And each neighborhood and each community has different needs and different goals. If you look at LA, the city we're in today, West LA is very different than South Central, than Mid-Wilshire, than downtown. And so, and I know Walter does this really well with his stores, of strategically making sure that they're in locations that are appropriate for gentrification, as an example. So I think when we talk about cities, yes, it's the macro issues, but we also have to talk about the specific neighborhood and community issues.
I was just going to say that the other piece of that, the antidote is to allow the development and to create the development of affordable housing and opportunities for people to have a stake in their neighborhood on an ongoing basis. In New York City, we have, again, that really depends on federal subsidy. This goes back to that point. Without the low-income housing tax credit and the Section 8 vouchers and public housing, we've got almost 500,000 people living in public housing, federally subsidized public housing. We can't allow the federal government to walk away from that obligation, because that is our barrier against gentrification. That allows people to stay in the community. Our mayor this week is going to announce a goal for 200,000 additional units of affordable housing. That has got to be a top priority in growing cities where all boats do not automatically float. It requires a real public investment.
And I can't help, my gosh, San Francisco is raging gentrification debate, right? You can't pick up your newspaper and magazine or newspaper watch Google buses being attacked by folks, throwing rocks, outraged by the hunter gamification of San Francisco, and those in the private sector going down in these air-conditioned buses, and the rest burdened by traditional public transit. And this has been the case in San Francisco for generations. We experienced this in the late 1990s, the boom bust, and it radically changed the politics of San Francisco. We had a mayor, Willie Brown, who was forced into a runoff campaign, almost lost his reelection over this. Our planning department was taken over and democratized, and the Board of Permit Appeals, a lot of things changed. And now we're going through the same process. So much so that an area of San Francisco, the mid-market area, 6th and Market, sort of an infamous area of San Francisco, if you traveled there, just a stone's throw away from the cable car turnaround right off the downtown core. When I was mayor, one of the last things I did was negotiate, try to keep Twitter in San Francisco, and we tried to organize. I actually went to my old campaign headquarters for lieutenant governor. It's where they ultimately moved in, but we negotiated a tax incentive. I handed it to the new mayor, who then introduced the legislation and took all the credit for it. And I say that lovingly, because this is the interesting punchline of the story. I begrudgingly sort of accepted that, and good for him. And now all of a sudden, because it's backfired, things are going so well and it's gentrified. Now all of a sudden my name is appearing as the guy that may have been associated with the original discussion. So it's an extraordinarily complicated issue.
Yes.
You want to make investments in traditionally underserved areas, but success then breeds its own unintended consequences. So Kathy's right. It's about making sure you invest in having a set-asides and affordable housing, making sure you invest in some form of protection for those that are most vulnerable to this kind of mass investment. But no one has figured this out. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this, but it is a raging challenge, particularly now in places like the Bay Area, where the high-tech community is outperforming almost every other sector of the economy.
So as someone in the middle of one of those partnerships, how would you walk that specific issue back? What would your advice be to Google? What would your advice be to Mayor Lee?
Well, they're catching up now. I mean, the challenge with San Francisco, we have the highest minimum wage in the United States of America, the only paid sick leave in the United States of America. We have universal health care, which even after the ACA is fully implemented, will be health care for all undocumented residents of our city, no other city in the country. We have, and I can wax on, we already have universal preschool, universal after school. We already have a strong partnership with our public school district. We have historic arts funding, and we have rent control. We have all of these things. So there's not many.
Surtax.
Surtax, as you refer to, yes. So I say all that. You may not like any of that. But those are the usual quivers, right, for a mayor. Say, okay, we're going to increase the minimum wage. Well, done that. We're going to have paid sick, things that you're talking about in New York. Right. And yet we haven't addressed the Gatsby curve. We haven't substantively addressed the concern about gentrification, even with all those things in place. So it requires, and by the way, those are all things that I had advocated in the past as antidotes. But I wouldn't necessarily argue for those as antidotes today because they're not good enough. Well, and so it's a very, very difficult thing to answer. I don't know that any of us, including the current mayor, have the answer to that question. And that's a big struggle for all of us.
It's a combination, I think, of education so that people are part of the economy. I think that what Tony's doing in terms of putting the tech community into a low-income district and making people who are in all sorts of businesses be part of that, I think it's an inclusion thing. People feel the Mayor de Blasio ran on a campaign, I'm not going to focus on the global economy, I'm going to focus on the local neighborhood economy, because people in the neighborhoods were feeling forgotten. We obviously know, as Tony Blair said in the speech yesterday, was talking about connectivity with the global community is the way all communities, all cities, all communities and countries are going to grow. We have to do both. And I think that's the challenge that we have, and that's where the global interests and the local interests come together, and it's in education. And I do think what New York City did during the 1980s when we rebuilt all our neighborhoods and included a very large proportion of ownership housing, low-income co-ops, as well as private two-family homes, three-family homes, that really solidified those neighborhoods against displacement. Gentrification, when is good for neighborhoods. It brings in stores, it brings in other kinds of support. It's not necessarily a negative. What's bad is displacing the longtime residents. And that, to me, we do know how to do that. It's a matter of will and resources. And as I say, the problem we have is the local tax base. Right now, New York City budget is $78 billion a year. Fully half of that is going to municipal employees, and more than half of those retired employees for pension and labor compensation. So the cities just don't have the resources. If we don't have the federal, we don't print money in cities. We've got to have the support of the federal government.
Well, I agree with you. I want to agree with you that we know the answer. But on a day where Twitter has an IPO and 1,600 million millionaires pop up, and they all think, hey, what am I going to do with this money? I may want to buy a home in a dense urban environment. I don't know any social policy that can get in the way of sort of the macroeconomic realities of a free market. And so we have the highest inclusionary housing set-asides and supportive housing. All these things, and it's just still not enough against the raging prosperity that exists in this fire hose. The challenge now for the tech community is to recognize that businesses can't thrive in a world that's failing.
That's right.
And they have a responsibility to be part of this solution, not just celebrate the payroll tax increase and the revenue they're bringing to the city, but to begin to connect, as you have organically, a sense of responsibility and stewardship with every employee into the culture of that business to say, we're part of this community, we're going to support it, and we're going to be part of that community for a long time, not just take advantage of the prosperity of the day and then move on in a transactional manner.
I totally agree with that point. I think that's what has to happen here is business has to step up to a higher level of responsibility. You're seeing that with Benioff in San Francisco putting together 12 tech companies to put the money. I mean, some of that was defensive in nature, I suspect, but nonetheless, them stepping and say, look, we recognize exactly what you said. We're part of this community. We want to contribute to those things. And I think it comes down to business rethinking their responsibilities in a community and their the level that they're going to participate in, and that's the quality of the jobs. It's the quality of the quality of their relationships in the community. That's what it comes down to. That's a voluntary thing.
Yep.
That's a recognition that your prosperity comes from being part of that community, and you need to participate in that way.
And because he deserves credit, Mark Benioff was born and raised in San Francisco, and the tech community was about to pool their money, all the fancy tech companies, to do a big billboard and advertising campaign to say, hey, folks, relax, look how great we are. Look at all the good things we're doing for you. And Benioff said, what the hell are we thinking? You're going to spend millions of dollars doing that?
This is like the banks during the financial
Exactly.
crisis.
It was insane. And he literally stopped it. And he got everyone together and said, enough. You know, how many multiple billionaires are here and you're giving token amount of money away? The equivalent of a mayor giving $500 away when you give away $5 million. That's not going to do it. It's time to step up. And he is leading the charge, Salesforce.com. No one is a better example of someone that gets it. Right. And I really appreciate you recognizing Mark for his leadership on this and beginning to now turn the corner with a lot of tech companies that are now waking up. We've got to get in front of this, to your point. Right.
So we're going to open it to your questions in a minute, and I'd point out that we have a mic at the back and a mic in the middle, so if you have a question, feel free to line up and get there. But before we do, the subject is U.S. cities, but Andy, we spoke a little bit about foreign direct investment in these cities. Can you tell me a little bit about the state of play there and what other countries are seeing in our cities and what they're doing with them?
Well, globalization is here to stay. We're seeing incredible investments from around the world in the U.S. right now. As an example, we just started working on a project in downtown Los Angeles. The largest developer out of China, Greenland, who in China are building, believe it or not, 530 million square feet at one time, has now come to the U.S. and invested in downtown Los Angeles. We're building a 3 million square foot project right north of LA Live. And they have a huge housing project in Brooklyn that they've invested in. There's other companies like Oceanwide that's investing in the U.S. So absolutely, over the last year, the Chinese have come into the West Coast specifically with investments. So we're seeing investments from around the world, especially obviously in New York City. You're seeing Russian investment, German investment. They're seeing the sovereign wealth funds, Abu Dhabi Investment Agency, they're seeing the U.S. as a safe haven for the money as their own currencies go through striations.
Do any of them actually want to do what the Chinese government has done, which is create new cities? I mean, there seems to be a lot of investment in established cities. Is anybody looking geographically and saying, no, we can get people there?
I think this is more about offshoring their money and less about development. There's no doubt in China they are creating their own cities, and just to talk about that for a second, we're seeing incredible new cities being built. 20 million Chinese moving to cities every year. Just think about that in the course of California or San Francisco. So I think that the Chinese and the investment is all about safe haven, development, offshoring their money.
Josh, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
This is just because I'm a food guy, and one of the things that's really interesting that's happened in cities is a revolution in urban agriculture. And many of the leading cities, Detroit, Chicago, Rahm Emanuel among them, have gone back and reworked their ordinances to let agriculture be a right of use, meaning that you actually can use your land to farm without having to go down to City Hall and work through the bureaucracy and that sort of thing. And so what you're seeing now is that's now the first generation that in Detroit, for example, there's about 1,600 gardens, and 100 of those are market gardens. They're actually a commercial application. What you're seeing now is the evolution in Chicago, other places of urban, urban ag districts that are now starting to move to generation 2 of creating entrepreneurial places for people to create value-added food products. And so you got a whole lot of economy that's happening that's possible through recycling land that's been sitting there vacant or with a blighted building on it and putting it to this sort of use. It's very exciting. You look at Milwaukee, you look at Chicago, you look at some of the other cities. This is an active area of innovation that's happening in these cities. And it's very exciting to see because it's also contributing to the sense of community in the sense that people are connected to their food once again. And it's also, in the case of, say, this company called Growing Home in Chicago, I talked to Harry Rhodes today, who's the executive director. They've trained 350 adults in these skills and have now placed them in the private sector. So it's actually a development program as well. So there's a lot of potential in this in cities, and I'm seeing a very innovative cycle around that.
I was the crazy mayor that turned the entire civic center into a big vegetable garden. And everyone thought I was nuts until Michelle Obama turned a little garden in front of the White House, and I was a visionary. But it's amazing what's happening with urban-rural focus now. And of course, but you also deserve, Walter, the credit. You guys have been on the leading edge of this movement and been an incredible steward.
It's one of those cool ideas that really is happening in cities now that's worth paying attention to. So.
Artisanal food, too.
What's that?
The artisans making the food.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll open it up. The question there.
My name is Sean Landris. I'm an investor and on the board of managers at Hub LA here in Los Angeles, which is a co-working community of change makers building the for-purpose economy in Los Angeles. One of the things that our members are concerned about and we see across the city is access to social enterprise capital and small business capital is still difficult, whether it's debt or equity. Tony, listening to your description of the woman who wanted to open the breakfast shop, you made that happen for her thanks to the serendipity of your meeting, and it was exactly what she needed to get going. What kinds of systems can be built so that at the small business end in cities, whether they're social enterprises, community building, there is access to capital, whether debt or equity?
Kathy, you want to tackle that first?
Well, I mean, the obvious, the head of the SBA is here at the conference, or at least was here yesterday, and so that's an obvious area where there's a lot of work to be done with, and the Export-Import Bank as well. There are vehicles that one can work with, but they're very constricted when it comes to particularly low-income areas and high-risk investment and people that can't guarantee their loan with their house and all that. And also here was Michael Schlein from Axion, and there are microfinance funds that fill some of this. Most of those are privately funded, or sometimes cities in New York, the cities and some of the city officials have put up funds to invest in those microfinance things. At the partnership, we have a $130 million fund that invests in in growth sector, small businesses, new ideas, that kind of thing. So I think it's got to be a combination of private and public interventions at a much greater scale than we have today.
And I'm very excited what's happening in the crowdfunding space and what's happening with all these new platforms from Indiegogo to, I mean, it seems like CrowdTilt every day there's a new one besides Kickstarter. And what's happening in the peer-to-peer world, which I think is a game changer. As the world moves mobile, local, social, cloud, crowd, in every respect, this is going to be, I think, a predominant advantage for these dense urban environments and the mass urbanization we're going through is that ability, as you're manifesting in Las Vegas, for that serendipity, for that sort of idea, that spark to immediately scale overnight and scale the imagination of potential suitors in non-traditional ways where you don't have to go through the filters of a traditional top-down industrialized lending institution.
Industrialized lending, I never heard that before.
Well, I'm just anti-industrial, period.
Yes, sir.
Sure. My name is Travian Shorters. I'm the founder of Be Me Community, and we use assets to build caring and prosperous communities. So, Tony, when you were talking about this idea of return on community, I think that's a radical and appropriate growth idea. And I'd love if you would be willing to elaborate on if there's any sequencing to collision, co-learning, and connection. What's the right order to those building blocks, if there is one?
I don't know if there's a sequence. We think all of those things are important, combined with density and diversity. And the analogy I would use, the way we think about it is at Zappos, when we hire employees, they actually go through 2 sets of interviews. The hiring manager and his or her team will interview for the standard stuff. Then our HR department does a separate set of interviews purely for culture fit, and they have to pass both in order to be hired. Because for us at Zappos, culture is the #1 priority for the company. And one of the things that we realized was that culture is to a company as community is to a city in a lot of ways. It's the same concept, just at a different scale. And so when we make investments, whether it's on the small business side or on the tech side, or we're also making investments in fashion and manufacturing and 3D printing and so on, all these different, like we're not a charity, and so the investments have to make sense in and of themselves. But then there's a separate criteria where they need to care about more than just themselves or their individual businesses. They need to care about the community. They need to want to help out other fellow entrepreneurs. And so there's been times when we've had to pass on,
really great.
On investments that could have had a high ROI, but because there wasn't the ROC component to it. And when we say ROC, it's not only the community element, but definitely the collision element is really important as well. Then it's a little slower in the beginning, but now the system just kind of feeds upon itself, and that's actually what's drawing a lot of entrepreneurs to actually who would have never ever considered Vegas before. Once they show up and hang out for a day or two, they're like, all right, I'm moving here.
So I want to take the moderator's prerogative to have the last question. What I'd like to do is ask each of you to name your favorite place in your favorite city and tell us why that exemplifies the values we've been talking about. Andy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I'd probably pick Austin, Texas.
We got to hook 'em horns at the end.
For so many reasons. I think it epitomizes mixed-use development. The downtown is vibrant, it's walkable, live, work, play. It's tied to the University of Texas so well, so there's so much learning and growing going on and entrepreneurship going on. Tech is huge there and taking off even more. The suburbs are tied into to the city center. The leadership is very strong. I think Austin, Texas, one of the most livable and most jobs created for Milliken Conference. I mean, it's an incredible city to be part of.
Yeah. I mean, I'm obviously biased to downtown Vegas, but I'd say within there, right now my favorite spot is the downtown container park, which we opened up last weekend of November, and so it's been about 5 months now. And 6 months ago, you would have not found any, it'd be really hard to find any kids or family anywhere in the downtown area. And we built it with a few different things in mind. One, I think it's the world's largest shipping container park. There's actually 40, it's a small business incubator, so 40 small businesses there, all local, where it's a chance for them to try out different concepts, and if one works out, then we might invest in them and get them a more permanent, bigger location. But really the focus of it is in the middle, where there's this kind of kids paradise. It's a 40-foot tall Swiss Family Robinson type of treehouse for kids, and we wanted to help create a place where it was the vibe of a backyard barbecue pool party, where kids are having fun, but the adults are able to have a beer, and in this case, they can drink their wine and cheese, watch live music. And so what I really like about it is it's brought together a lot of kids and family to this area of downtown. It's an incubator for small businesses. It's putting downtown Vegas on the map for live music as we build out different live music venues. And it's also just a fun place. It's just a fun place to hang out for adults and kids. And so a month ago, we passed our 500,000th visitor On any given Saturday, there might be 13,000 people there, mostly kids and family, and so it's just been great seeing that transformation go from almost no kids and family, and 2 years ago I would have myself felt unsafe standing outside of that location, to now it's teeming with all these different people.
Wow. I'll just be contemporary. I was with my 4- and 2-year-old this Saturday, walking where I basically grew up in the Marina District in San Francisco, but right on Crissy Field, and we walked around in the Presidio, and I've got to just say, you can't beat it.
Well, I have to say Brooklyn, New York. I moved there in 1968 from Wisconsin, and it was a total shock, but I fell in love with Brooklyn, and to see a city that's gone from on the waterfront and the Fonz to today totally rebranded, but just as inclusive as ever, of every ethnicity, every group, everybody. It's an amazing place, and it's great to see it on such a high.
Yeah. All of the above.
The politician.
No,
he's got a stake in the
right. Well, the truth is,
running for something.
So I live on Fifth Street in Austin, and so I can tell you that it is all that you say it is, and yet it's growing so quickly that the character is changing as well. But I have to say I've been really drawn to Detroit for many reasons, personal, business-wise, and seeing re-immersing in the diversity of humanity has been that experience, and for so many reasons. And it's a different sort of transformation than what Tony's doing in Las Vegas, but to watch that all the things that are happening around community and diversity, those discussions have been, it's been some of the most rewarding times of my life. So I would give Detroit a thumbs up.
Here.
That's great.
How about a hand for these panelists?